So looking at the matchup between Tsarukyan and Charles Oliveira, there's a lot of things to unpack. The wrestling ability that Arman possesses is a real threat. And Charles Oliveira, while he's very good off his back, Arman's the kind of fighter that's really hard to submit from the back. I think if Charles Oliveira is to get a submission over Arman Tsarukyan, it will be when he takes a dominant position, maybe modified mount, he transitions to a back take, slips in a rear naked choke. We saw him finish both Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje with rear naked chokes, and he proved against Dustin that he can do it on the feet as well. Was a standing sort of backpack rear naked choke finish, and then with Justin Gaethje, some beautiful striking that leads to a knockdown, and then just an absolute pouncing submission threat that he has from there. So Charles is always going to possess that, but if Arman gets him to the ground and starts to maintain some good position and rain down some ground and pound, how will Charles handle that? That's kind of yet to be determined. That was where Islam Makhachev had some success against Charles. He was able to do what he needed to do to open Charles's guard up and then get that knee cut pass and take a head and arm triangle submission. Can Arman do that? Now, Arman's wrestling is not to the level of Islam Makhachev's. It's very good, but Islam is kind of in a league all of his own in the UFC right now. So we'll have to see if Arman is at that level. But here's the reality of the situation. I'm not picking this young, hungry lion to defeat the old dog just yet. We saw it with Benoit Saint-Denis. We saw a guy who we thought had all the promise in the world and truthfully probably still does come up and challenge a guy that's been sitting at the top of the division to say, hey, you know what? Are you just a name recognition sort of position? Or are you really a guy who deserves to be in the top 5? And Dustin Poirier showed to the young BSD that he's very much still capable, even after 35 years of age, at defending his position and potentially even being in a close striking range to getting a title shot. Well, Charles Oliveira is no different. In fact, Charles Oliveira defeated Dustin Poirier in emphatic fashion. Charles has some absolutely electric striking. He is a lot to deal with on the feet.
For sure.
Now, one thing he does do that he's going to have to watch out for is he throws a lot of body kicks, and Arman's very good at catching the body kick and then throwing a hook off of the exchange. He lands that short hook in transitions. He lands it off of the catch of a leg kick. So that's one thing I'm sure Charles's team has watched and will have to game plan for. Be careful to let that leg get caught and then you get cracked or get taken down from there. So I'm sure I'm interested to see what wrinkles he's going to have in his game plan as far as that's concerned. But I just think anywhere there's very few places for Arman to take this fight and have success. Can he have success on the feet? Yes. Anybody can go down. Charles Oliveira has been dropped before. Arman Tsarukyan can certainly get dropped by Charles Oliveira, but I still think that Charles is a couple levels above Arman in the striking department. Now, is Arman a better wrestler than Charles? Yes, he is. But do you really want to take the guy to the ground that's got the most submissions in UFC history and can scramble very well, can transition very well? When he defeated Justin Gaethje, the way he transitioned to the back so quick and slipped in that body triangle and rear naked choke, it's like beautiful. A thing of beauty. I mean, he has just a relentless submission hunting type of style from the ground. So Arman's going to have to be very careful if he takes it to the ground to maintain good posture, do damage, throw some elbows. He's very good at that. And not to say he can't do it against Charles, but he's going up against the guy that has submitted more people than anybody in the history of the organization. So, listen, 2-1 underdog to me for Charles Oliveira is crazy.
Yeah.
Charles do Bronx Oliveira is the guy, unless you're talking about Islam Makhachev. He's the Robert Whittaker. He's the Max Holloway. He's the Charles Oliveira of 155. Right. He beats everybody that's not Islam Makhachev, and on any given night, he could actually compete with Islam, and who knows what would happen. So my prediction is that Charles Oliveira, the 2-1 underdog, is going to get the victory in this one. I think he's going to do it by technical knockout, probably in the second or third round.
Well, yeah, and I'm really excited to see who ends up leaving with fight bonuses from UFC 300 because the entire thing is stacked. The very first fight of the night is 2 former world champions. And I think that Charles Oliveira, if there's any thing else he could add into the history book, is that he might have some of the most exciting first rounds. Now, I know you don't get a bonus for first round,
excitement,
type of thing.
Yeah.
But Arman Tsarukyan, I feel, is going to come out guns a-blazing. And look, when you're dealing with a dominant wrestler, you have to understand they have a very good understanding of body control, of grounding, and knowing how to change levels and utilize power. They know how to use their legs, and then they can send the power that they're generating from their legs from the ground through their hands and land some really nice shots. And it's the same thing we saw with Khabib. The threat of the takedown on Conor McGregor was enough to get Conor to drop his hands down. And then you saw the heavy wrestler knock down the great striker. And I think Charles Oliveira stands a little bit too tall for my liking. Obviously, he's doing a lot of things right in his UFC career, but he does stand a little bit tall. And Arman Tsarukyan is very good at the classic wrestler combination, which is a double jab while you're moving your feet in to keep their hands and attention up here, and then you're slightly changing levels as you throw an overhand with your backhand, and it's very powerful. The wrestlers that understand how to translate their wrestling into MMA can throw this very well, and as long as you find your right angle and you're not shooting straight at somebody, you are either going to land that big overhand or you're going to wind up in wrestling range, which is very important. That's what Arman wants. But I worry that he's going to come in too hot and he's going to look for that shot. He's probably even going to land it. And there's a good chance we could see Charles Oliveira on the ground in the very first round. But you have to remember, fighters stay very dry in the first round. And then when round 2 starts, you start to see them sweating, and that's when submissions become a bit more difficult. So Arman has to be a little bit careful and calculated. Of course, you're going to look to get into wrestling range, but if you knock Charles Oliveira down in the first 30 seconds when he's completely dry, that's when his submissions from the bottom are the most lethal. That's when he's going to have the most energy and have the highest chance of getting back up to his feet. So that's why I think Arman Tsarukyan really does need to threaten takedowns and threaten level changes a lot early on, just so he can have Charles Oliveira guessing a little bit. Now, Charles is very good everywhere, from the Thai clinch and the striking. He does a bit of a more Muay Thai stance when you're talking about pure striking, and that can be susceptible to getting your head punched because boxers move their head really well. Muay Thai fighters don't move their head quite as well. And a wrestler like Arman Tsarukyan, who's going to throw these heavy bombs and change levels, and he's going to throw unpredictable punches from very different angles as well as depths, you have to be careful because Muay Thai fighters, they don't have the head movement and they don't have the lateral movement of a boxer. And that's why I feel like Charles Oliveira gets caught so often in the early parts of the fight. But the young, less experienced fighter in Arman Tsarukyan has to remember that Charles Oliveira is as tough as nails. He's one of the toughest dudes that we've ever seen in the UFC. And just because you do happen to get lucky and drop him in the very early parts of the fight doesn't mean you have to go gung-ho and try to get him out of there. I know that Charles Oliveira is a big name. It's the biggest name Arman Tsarukyan's ever had on his resume. And if he's able to get a win over him, that's huge. And when you knock somebody down in the first minute or 2 minutes of a fight, you think, all right, let me go in there and get this thing over with. But Charles is often there. By the end of the first round, he's usually back up to his feet and still fresh as a daisy, coming back at you. And now you've dumped some of your adrenaline trying to get that early finish. And now you still have to go another 10 minutes with Charles Oliveira. So it's a very difficult line for Arman to kind of balance, but I think he needs to bring a lot of pressure, but not get too gung-ho if he does find success on with his hands. If he knocks Charles Oliveira down, position over submission, even position over ground and pound strikes. Make sure you tire this guy out, and more importantly, you start to daze him a little bit with your heavy striking, with your dominant control. This is a 15-minute fight, and if Arman Tsarukyan's getting his hand raised, I predict it's going to be through a judge's decision. If there's a finish in this fight, I believe it's going to go to Charles Oliveira because I think the young guy's going to dump his adrenaline too much, too early, and then Charles Oliveira is still there. He's still very lethal on the ground. And once he starts stuffing a couple of your takedowns, then you get a little bit more predictable. That gains confidence in Charles Oliveira's mind, and now you're dealing with a straight-up assassin who's very good on the feet.
Yeah, so final prediction, who are you going to take?
Final prediction, I can't go with the young Hungry Lion. Look, Arman Tsarukyan probably will be a world champion in the UFC within the next 5 years, and he's absolutely the future, just like Benoit Saint-Denis, Mateusz Gamrot, Rafael Fiziev. These guys are on their way, but I don't think the old dogs have seen their best days. I think Charles Oliveira is going to go in there. Likely, I'm going to say this is going to be fight of the night. I mean, this is a crazy card to try to predict who's going to get the bonuses. I think Charles Oliveira goes out there, deals with some adversity in the early parts of the first round, ends up getting a pretty close, even first round, and then somewhere in the second round finds some of that vicious striking, likely in the clinch because we know Arman's going to try to close distance and utilize some of that grappling. Charles Oliveira is very dangerous in the Muay Thai clinch, and he knows how to throw nasty elbows and knees up the middle. So watch out for all of that stuff. I see a TKO finish for Charles Oliveira come round 2.
Nice. We're both taking the underdog.
Yep.